Okay, let's get started. Presentation mode. All right. So today, guys, we have a very interesting agenda. We have a few follow-ups from last time. We are gonna actually start with the product and features roadmap slide that I'm gonna get to in a second. Then again, a few updates on what we discussed last time, a new vote that is live right now. We're gonna talk about a new way of sourcing liquidity called RFQ, and then giving you another update on meta transaction endpoint. So we wanted actually to start our upcoming meetings with this quick slide that we're not gonna go through all of these details, but we thought it would be good for you guys to have a sort of a glance view of what we're working on in the short and longer term. And we thought it would be good for you to basically keep track of all the projects that are going on. And we know that at each time we, give you updates about projects that might sound like scattered, and maybe we give an update about something one time, and 2 months down the line, you might be wondering where is that project at. So with this slide, we hope to basically give you an idea of what all these projects are and where we're at with these color-coded columns, where we basically want to give different phases of the projects from ideation to development, which is the actual implementation, where applicable a governance vote, then testing phase and launch. So you will get a lot of updates today about some of the items here, but we will let you guys consult that once we share the slides. So you'll be able to basically maybe ask questions, follow-up questions on our channels. Quick update on the vote. As many of you know, I've heard that there are a few folks here that actually manage the staking pools. So we have a vote going on. It's gonna be over in, I think, 4 hours or so. It's a vote about adjusting the length of epoch, of the epochs of staking from 10 days to 7 days. The overwhelming kind of majority of people have voted for yes, so it feels like it's gonna be implemented. A couple of things to note: this is the highest turnout ever. Like, we are close to 11 million ZRX voting power, so it's pretty amazing result. But what's actually even more interesting to notice is that a majority of that vote comes from delegated voting, which is really, if you want, a representation of the new token economics in place. So we heard, there's Joao, there's Craig, there are other people from Rigo that basically voted, asking in certain instances what their delegators wanted to vote on. So it's pretty good to see this in action. So thank you for participating in this, and your role is really crucial for the development of the protocol. Today we have an update around the exchange proxy proposal that we are pushing for, and we have Greg in the call that can give us a quick update on that. Greg?
Yep, hi everyone. So quick recap, this is the current exchange architecture. The core protocol logic is in a single exchange smart contract that we upgrade periodically, roughly once a year. We extend the functionality of our protocol by building extension contracts which wrap the exchange, or by building proxies and putting additional instructions in our asset data. So this has provided a good foundation up until now, and it creates a standardized flow of value from left to right. But the issues that we've run into is that we have to upgrade this core logic more frequently, and it restricts our ability to do so, having to overload the extensions or the proxies. And when we do have to upgrade the core logic, it's strenuous on our integrators, and it ends up being a very time-consuming process. Next slide, Theo. So the goal of our re-architecture is basically, we've recognized that the ecosystem is very dynamic and very fast-paced, and we need a way for the protocol to evolve alongside this. So with our new exchange architecture, we are using a delegated proxy pattern, similar to what we used in the staking architecture. This gives us a single gateway into the exchange protocol with singular upgradable features, and now a more flexible flow of value. So this means that if you've worked with our existing orders, you may have seen that we had to do lots of hops between contracts. So from the forwarder to the exchange to a bridge proxy, perhaps to another bridge. So we no longer have that requirement of a long string of calls. We can have more flexible interactions between our contracts and also more efficient upgrades. In the current quarter, we're experimenting with new features. And through these experiments, we're using a new set of proxies. So this won't affect the security guarantees of the existing exchange. You won't have to do anything in the near term. The first feature that we're building out right now is this WETH unwrapping. So we've previously released a forwarder contract that allowed you to sell Ether using 0x orders, and this new feature will allow you to buy Ether using 0x orders, which depend on the WETH ERC20 token. Also in the near term, we're going to be experimenting with different ways that these features can interact and different ways that we can make the exchange process more efficient by remodeling the flow of value throughout this architecture. Cool, that's all. Any questions, I guess?
Yeah.
Or are we saving those to the end?
No, I think it's a good time to ask if there are any questions from the group. Oh. Cool. And in like going a little bit more in practical terms, as Greg said, we're going to experiment with this design pattern with specific features, but we basically see a moment, provided that this pattern works and gives us like good flexibility in adding new features, and it's secure. This will be a candidate for, if you want, the exchange v4, which hopefully is going to be one of the last breaking changes that we will introduce, because basically we will have this exchange proxy becoming the canonical entry point for all things in the pipeline of smart contracts. But by having this proxy being the final entry point, that means that in the future, once that v4 is the canonical entry point, we'll be able to change things behind that entry point and have votes much quicker and not having monolithic upgrades once a year or so. All right. There are no questions. We should move to the next update, which is around RFQ, which is a new way of sourcing liquidity. Blake, do you want to take it from here or from the actual RFQ? I just wanted to give everybody a recap of where we're at today. Do you want to take it from here?
No, I feel like you can take it from here and I'll cover RFQ. Okay, so I wanted, before actually talking about RFQ, we also have an update around meta transaction. I wanted to, again, step back and offer a recap of what basically which sources of liquidity are available through 0x API. Earlier this year, we released 0x API, basically your easy way of accessing 0x liquidity and aggregated liquidity. Again, you as a dApp developer, you can basically offer your users through a simple API call, not only all the liquidity that is available on Mesh, which is, as you know, the 0x orders being distributed in the network, but also in one go, also all the aggregated liquidity coming from pools like Kyber, Uniswap, Oasis, Curve, etc. So really what we wanted to provide is like this single entry point for you to get all the best prices. Now, what we are going to introduce today is basically a new way of or an additional source of liquidity, which is again coming in addition to the other two, with basically always the objective of giving the best prices to your users, which is a request for quote, basically type of liquidity. What that is, and Blake is going to basically take it now, is it's basically a on-demand liquidity given to users. So I just wanted to provide this context. And now, Blake, off you go.
Sure.
Sure. So I feel like most people on this call know that there are limitations to 0x open order books. Right now, the problem, market makers on 0x open order books are limited on how good of pricing they can really offer because their liquidity is available to everybody, including arbitrage bots. So if you're a market maker and you put your order out there, even if you have an expiration time of say 2 or 3 minutes, if the price changes while your order is out there, somebody can grab your order and arbitrage it. The solution, and we've been working on this for a while, are these request for quote systems, which allow market makers to customize their pricing based on who is requesting liquidity. So market makers using a request for quote system receive real-time information about the taker that they were serving. So they can see, oh, this is a retail taker, or this is a potential arbitrage bot, or this is coming from a specific application that I know about and I want to serve those users. And therefore, I can offer them differential pricing based on the information that I have about them. And the proof point here is we've actually seen these systems performing quite well in the wild. 30% plus of 1 inch's volume is now flowing through a request for a quote system. And the reason for that is, users like RFQ models because they get better pricing and they get lower revert rates. Market makers don't have to cancel their orders because they're not being arbitraged consistently. Market makers like RFQ models because they have more information about their taker, which means they can offer the right price at the right time, which means they can actually make more money. And integrators, so applications that are tapping into the 0x API for liquidity, like these models because their users are happy. Their users get better pricing because a lot of these applications have retail users that market makers really want to serve liquidity to, and therefore can offer really competitive pricing for. So really, in these new systems, everybody wins except for arbitrageurs, and that's a net win for the ecosystem. Can we go to the next slide? So I wanted to walk you through what this looks like at a really high level. This is getting a bit more granular, but just for people who want to know how this works, an application or a taker in this instance sends a request into our 0x API. And the 0x API does 2 things based on that request. The first is on top up here. It looks for all the open order book and on-chain liquidity sources. But at the same time, it also, on the bottom here, reaches out directly to a market maker and passes along the information that the taker gave them. So the taker, it has the taker's address and it has sort of where that request came from. For step 3, all of that open order book liquidity, all of that on-chain liquidity, and all of the requests, all of the responses from those market makers go into the sampling and routing technology that's part of the API. And the API finds the best possible, let's say, order salad. So pieces of those particular orders that it should put together in order to get the taker of the trade the best possible price and the best possible transaction that they can get. It passes all of that information back to the taker in a nicely packaged transaction. And then they are free to sign that transaction and actually send it to the chain to complete. So the API without request for quote system is already looking at all this open order book liquidity and all this on-chain liquidity to get users the best pricing. The only differential here is that it now pings a bunch of market makers directly and gives them real-time information so that they can quote to that particular user, and all of that liquidity can be included in this final transaction that the user gets. Can we go one more slide? And so we've actually already built out this particular system. We're starting to beta test it right now. If you're a potential integrator with the API or are already using the API and want this liquidity, please reach out to me directly. My email's right here. You can also DM me on Discord. If you're a market maker and want to learn more about serving liquidity through RFQ, this can definitely make you more money. Reach out to me again. Happy to get you set up with this. And I'm not sure if there's anybody else on here who's just a 0x user and wants their favorite app to offer even better pricing. If they are, feel free to share this deck with them directly, or feel free to connect me with them directly. I would love to walk them through this system. We're pretty excited that the aggregated pricing that can come from giving market makers real-time information about takers is going to be pretty incredible for the users of those applications. I want to stop there and just see if there's any questions about this new request for quote system that's going to be offered by the 0x API.
So, Blake, only one small question. This will be open for market makers of any size, or the market maker that will be providing quotes needs to have size orders of minimum 5 ETH, 10 ETH, or at the moment you don't have any limitation of requests for quotes?
Yeah, that's a great question. The system right now is whitelisted for both takers and for makers. But we don't currently have a minimum amount that you can provide through this particular system. Where we, would like to work with market makers who would like to provide larger size orders, but anything over a few $100s is fine. And I would love to talk to you about it in more detail if you're interested.
Okay.
All right. I guess I can pass it off to the next slide. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Blake. I think we're gonna go back to RFQ over the next slides, because now we're actually talking about meta transaction 0x API endpoints. I copied the same slide as last time. Last time, we introduced this concept as a solution for the problem described above there. Sending an Ethereum transaction requires users to hold ETH to pay for fees, and that's obviously a problem for a lot of apps developers and their users. So something that we wanted to work on was, again, a suite of meta transaction endpoints that basically leverages 0x transaction in order to provide a gasless experience for their users. And we made a lot of progress on that. And one of the open questions that still we had was who's sending actually the Ethereum transaction at the end. And what we're gonna basically walk you through today is a setup where it's actually the app itself sending and paying for the fees. And we heard from a few developers that there are actually some interest in that model. But again, this is a very new offering we're working on. So expect other iterations later on. But let me actually dig deeper a bit on the flows. It's a pretty dense slide with a lot of flows. So let's follow the ordering here. So there are actually 3 moments for the user. There's a moment where they're actually only browsing prices. Maybe they're like clicking through, selecting different pairs, maybe changing the quantities around, and they're basically in price exploration mode. That's only when they're really close to closing the quote that they're going to be in a request final quote phase. And finally, there's the phase where they're actually ready to settle that transaction. So let's actually go through all the flows here. Once they are in exploration mode, basically they talk with the app, and the app actually pings meta transaction price to the 0x API, and 0x API will return in the classic format all the orders back to the user. Once the user is ready actually to start the final quote system, similarly, the app will receive the request, the app will ping 0x API, and the difference is that now basically the 0x API will return a 0x transaction with all the orders. The 0x transaction, for those that are not familiar with that, is actually a format that is recognized by the exchange smart contract to basically fill an order where the sender address is not the taker address, or actually in the context of the taker address, but someone else is sending the transaction. So basically, the app can submit the transaction on behalf of their users. So what 0x API returns here is a 0x transaction that is returned to the user. The user doesn't need to hold ETH or anything. They just need to sign that 0x transaction. So it's going to be basically an experience where no balances are shown. It's just signing that transaction. It's returned to the app. The app basically calls submit to 0x API. That's the final stage. 0x API is going to basically return a unsigned 0x Ethereum transaction with the 0x transaction within it. So the app will just need to basically submit the Ethereum transaction and pay for all the fees. So this is a very high level flow of the meta transaction endpoints. And again, the value prop is we want to give apps a way to give their users a gasless experience. We just finished the meta transaction endpoints last week, so they're really kind of fresh and new. We already actually have created the specs in the website, so we encourage those that are interested in having a look there. And again, yeah, ping us if you are interested in integrating this. And yeah, I'll leave it to that. And also, if there are questions around this, feel free to ask them now. No questions? Cool. I actually wanted to give a quick overview of actually a comparison between what we just seen before, RFQ and meta transactions, because we understand this could be a little bit overwhelming for the people watching this. But it's actually interesting to try to separate the liquidity that is provided from the experience that is provided to the users. So if we look at the two macro columns here, we have two experiences for the user. User submits transaction, or someone else submits the transaction for them. These are the two cases. And then we distinguish that from the liquidity that is provided to users, which is, as you know, there is the open order book liquidity, or like the mesh liquidity, the on-chain aggregated liquidity, and the request for quote liquidity. It actually has two different versions to that. But I wanted to make sure to stress the fact that today we basically talked about these two things only. Blake basically walked us through RFQ system, where basically we allow developers to tap into basically on-the-fly quoted prices, and it's going to be done through a similar approach, so via a price exploration plus firm quote plus whitelisted API keys. Whereas what I just shown now is actually a different basically thing, which is more actually focused on the gasless experience. So we're basically gonna give away for developers to offer gasless experience to their users. These two things can be combined, meaning we could have here on the right a world where we offer gasless experience to users and also on-the-fly quoted prices. And that's something that we're gonna probably talk more about later, but basically offers another flavor of RFQ, which is we call RFQ M because it's on the maker side, where basically the market maker is the one having the last look on the quote and actually submitting the transaction. It's a bit early to talk at length about that, but we wanted to provide a sort of a framework to understand these different things. And we're probably going to repurpose this table again next time we have more to share. Questions before we change topic? All right. Feel free to ask them later. All right, we're actually at the end of the core updates. Just recapping again the active forum items that we have right now. We have a discussion that actually resulted in a vote around shorter staking epoch length, and also we still have open discussions around 0x protocol v4 wishlist. So feel free to again jump into that and ask what features you would like to have on a v4. And obviously the exchange proxy, which is ongoing. Greg gave us an update, but we would love to hear your thoughts about that. All right, we are done for the content standpoint for today, but we have almost 15 minutes left. It would be good to discuss, hear your thoughts about what we presented earlier. If you want to dig deeper on a topic, the floor is yours.
Can I do a small question? What happens if 0x API is shut down? Because why I'm doing this? Why I'm doing this question? Because I decided to use asset swapper instead of 0x API because of that. Because I don't know what happens if the government goes and then decides to shut down a service like this, like provide code. So what if there is any strategy to mitigate if government goes against some kind of this service?
Mm-hmm.
I can take that. That's a great question, Joao. All the 0x API code is open source. So in fact, you could run your own 0x API instance. The 0x core team runs an API instance, which currently most people consuming liquidity from the API are using our self-hosted instance, but you could also run your own instance in case you wanted to do that, rather than using asset swapper directly. Does that answer your question?
But still needs a server to run it. It's not like 0x Max that you don't need a server for it. It's only if there is any, because anyone can spin up a 0x API, but it still needs a server for it. It's not it not works like decentralized like 0x Max. I don't know if you guys thought about it to port 0x API to 0x Max to run it decentralized, fully decentralized. Maybe this will not happen. It's only if it happens like things like that.
That's a fantastic question, Joao. I think it's important to maybe, let me actually go back to the, no, I'll just try to reply without slides. But first of all, it's important to basically understand that 0x API, it's a server, actually it runs on a server operated by 0x core team. But that doesn't mean that the same exact equal service could be run by someone else in another part of the world. So that already, if one goes down, the other is alive. Exactly. That means that, basically other developers could bing to the same one. Then another thing I want to point out, 0x API is 0x mesh. You can actually think of 0x API as a 0x mesh plus something else. The open order book liquidity doesn't go down. So in the same way, there's no way to basically shut this thing down. But I'm not sure if this is like helping, but just want to basically reassure the fact that 0x API is not something that it's like it's prone to be like destroyed if the government decide to stop our own instance. It could be run in by another team and provide the exact same service. Does this answer the question, Joao? And it's very important to understand that again, 0x API and 0x API connects to mesh. And
yes, that's why in my instance I decided to use asset swapper because of that. Because I look at it and maybe it's better I use asset swapper now, and then after ported to 0x API as optional, but that was my main decision to use asset swapper instead of 0x API, because actually it's the same, but asset swapper will work without serverless, because only needs 0x max to node to connect it. So maybe this is not will happen. It's only if it happens, because we don't know what the government and what people are maybe can do to shut down the system, or I don't know. Yeah. Maybe this is so maximalist. I only to show why I decided instead of use 0x API, I decided to use the asset swapper. But now I'm seeing that maybe I lose the RFKT feature because of that, because or asset swapper will integrate the RFKT under the hood, or there will be separate features.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you are thinking a few steps ahead and wanting to reduce these dependencies and go almost fully decentralized for your product's infrastructure. I do want to share a little bit more about our thinking and why, for example, Mesh is fully decentralized and the API, while you can still run your own instance, and that the more instances that are running, the more decentralized the API is, and why we decided to host our own instance. So I want to provide a little bit more context there, as I think it might be useful to understand better how we made this decision. Basically, what we saw is that unfortunately, not all teams are ready to go fully decentralized on their infrastructure. Not everyone is willing to go directly to asset swapper or directly to Mesh. Most of them are worried about finding product market fit, and we want them to be able and have the tools to focus on finding that product market fit and do what they do best, which is building products, getting those products to market. So we thought that providing a self-hosted instance of the API was the first step, or something that would make it easier for teams to leverage all of this liquidity. But the reason why we still allow teams, or enable teams to run their own API instance, is because we believe that some teams are more ready than others to have a little bit more decentralization in their infrastructure and run other parts of their infrastructure than other teams. So we want to still have teams to have that option still. And then there's other teams like Very Safe and Yuyo who are very much ready, to go fully decentralized and can, connect to Mesh directly and can connect to asset swapper directly. So we believe that everyone or every team that is trying to consume liquidity from 0x or through 0x is at a different stage, and we wanted to provide an option for everyone, basically. I don't know if that's helpful, but I thought.
Yes, the other question is that the RFKT will be done on asset swapper, or it will be another library? The request for codes.
It will only be offered directly through the 0x API.
But that will be offered like a liquidity provider. It will be another library that will provide that kind of code. Is that it?
I think yes. You're asking from the providing liquidity perspective, no?
I'm asking if I need to offer on Veridex a request for code, I can use it using asset swapper, or I need to integrate 0x API? Is that my question?
For today's build, you'll need to use 0x API rather than asset swapper.
Okay. Okay, for me, I did all my questions. Sorry if I'm being too, because it was the thing I thought at first time. Maybe I'm being careful too much about it, but the alternative is already there, and I can port it back to 0x API or have the both options. It will not have any problem. Besides of that, because I tried to develop. I said that in the Discord. I tried to develop a full decentralized DEX. And it's possible now with Electron develop a full decentralized DEX where we use Ethereum node and the Max node, and then we'll not depend of any party to run tradings, basically. So that's why I'm asking if you guys thought about it, about alternatives if governance and that kind of things happens. But it's open source, and if the government shuts down, anyone other will put it up. So I think it's fine, that strategy.
Any other questions? Let's see on the comments. A few questions about API. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, again, I hope you all know the channels where you can reach out to the team and maybe ask follow-up questions. Brent, do you want to walk through where the slides are going to be posted, etc.? You know the protocol, so I'll leave it to you maybe to share the next steps.
Sure. Yeah, sure. For anyone who isn't familiar, we post this recording sans the intros on our YouTube channel, and there's also a link in the YouTube video description to the actual slides. In addition, there's a GitHub repo we created just specific for all of the meeting archives. So you can also find the slides there. That's also referenced in the YouTube channel. You can, we'll announce that in our Discord channel. That's the best place to see the direct links. So, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.